Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the data migration from Desk to Service Cloud, planning and executing your move. I am Kevin Prodell, and I am a senior technical consultant here at Desk.com. I've been working in the data migration space for about 4 years now, initially moving customers into Desk, and the last 6 months to a year have been focusing more on moving customers from Desk into Salesforce. I just wanted to cover any forward-looking statements here. Please make any purchasing decisions based on what's currently available in the product and not on anything otherwise. Thanks. All right, so today's agenda, we're going to go over a little bit a different agenda than our last webinar on data migrations. We're going to focus a little bit more on the planning and defining your data. It's kind of the first steps. Before we kind of focused on the migration tool itself, we're going to cover a little bit more about the planning aspect of the data migration, and then we'll get into the tools and have a little demo, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Note that this session is being recorded, and we're going to forward along a copy to you. All right, well, let's start with the basics. What is a data migration? So the very core of it, it's just moving data between two separate platforms. Desk and Salesforce are different platforms, although we're owned by the same parent company. Desk is a totally separate system and runs independently from Salesforce. So moving that data between the two systems is not quite as simple as just clicking a button and exporting, although we would like it to be. However, so the data model is very similar actually, but there are some key differences, and we'll have to make some assumptions in order to make the data from Desk fit into Salesforce. But overall, for the data migration, we have two goals. First one is to facilitate a smooth transition for your customers and agents. This is the most important thing, being able to transition quickly and easily between two systems and not have your customers notice, and having your agents being able to operate at the same high level that they were before. That's kind of the overall goal. And then the secondary goal is to recreate the historical case information. And I think that's kind of a departure from what we've talked about in the past. The historical case information is kind of the main focus, but I think that it's actually should be the transition should be the overall goal, and then the data comes kind of second. All right, so let's talk about planning and migration. And I wanted to give a quick overview just to outline kind of the key timeline dates and the steps needed to execute a migration. There's actually a lot of planning and testing that goes on beforehand, and that it's almost as important as the actual day of. And these pre-migration steps are going to set you up for success. So let's go through these. So pre-migration, what we want to do, the first thing we want to do is create a planning source of truth. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, this would be a document that would be accessed by anyone involved in the data migration. It would be a central source of truth. Ideally, it would have some sort of live updates, something like Google Sheets or Google Docs or Quip, or there's a bunch of other project management software out there. We've seen some customers with some really great Asana boards, Trello, that sort of thing. Works really well for this. But just having that central source of truth where people can go and reference what the steps are and reference specific information items, that's I think the first step to any successful data migration. Now, the second step is to pick a target migration date. Now, it may change along the way, but if you don't pick a date, like initial goal, then we find that it's hard to actually get started. So picking a initial date is just a good step to kind of just generalize your timeline and get things moving. The third thing, define your data requirements. This one, I think not enough customers put thought into, but basically what this means is you would review your data in Desk and identify what you actually need and what is just kind of either just junk or stuff that's not really required. So processes change over the years, and sometimes you have old processes that are just kind of sitting there, and custom fields that may not be doing much. So part of defining your data requirements is just reviewing what you have and then making decisions on what you need going forward. The fourth step is to test various migration tools. We'll cover some of those, but we definitely recommend you test them out in a sandbox beforehand and practice with your data migration tool. That's a great way to ensure that you have a smooth transition on migration day. 5, select a migration tool. So once you've tested them out, pick the winner, and then finalize your migration plan and date. This will happen as you get closer to the migration day. And then on migration day, you'll execute your cutover, and I'll talk about what the cutover is a little bit more. But it's essentially the specific list of steps you'll use to transition. And then you'll run your production migration and post-migration cleanup. So on the right side here is a sample timeline. We recommend that you start at least thinking about things 90 days in advance. That's ideal. Obviously, there may be situations where people have shorter timelines, but this is kind of a good starting point. If you have the time, I would start thinking about it 90 days in advance. And then with 60 days to go, testing migration tools, and 30 days, select a migration tool and start finalizing and communicating your migration plan. It's essential to start communicating early and often with your team, especially there's going to be a lot of things going on with your training and setup and the data migration. So it's important that everyone is on board with what's going on for each part of the migration. And then a week out, do a full test run and nail down any kinks in the plan and make sure that everybody's practiced at what they're doing. And then on production migration day, run your migration. So that's just a quick sample. It's very high level, but I highly recommend incorporating this kind of timeline and list of tasks into your source of truth, and have a way to track and assign those tasks. And I think it'll help you be set up for success. All right, so I mentioned the cutover. So what is the cutover? It's basically what happens on migration day. It's a list of specific steps that you'll take and practice to actually transition from Desk to Service Cloud. And so the key thing here is that you'll want to switch over your inbound email and social channels and your portal channel, if you have that, in Desk. And so you want to turn those off and simultaneously turn them on in Service Cloud. So this is kind of the no going back point, basically the point of no return where you are committed to moving. Because once you switch over your inbound channels, they'll start creating new cases in Service Cloud, and you'll start working in Service Cloud. So the second step there is agents make their move to Service Cloud. So immediately after all the channels are enabled in Service Cloud, then agents will move over. And then at that point, you shouldn't have any cases coming into Desk or any replies. And you'll be able to start the data migration because that part will be finalized. So depending on what route you go, that could take, you know, a few hours. And then during that time, the agents will start working on new cases that come in during the data migration. And then the data migration will finish some point later. And then agents can reach out and establish case continuity on their on those migrated cases. And I'll talk about that in just a second. But yeah, and then once the data migration is done and agents have reached out, then we'll finish with post-migration cleanup. So a lot of customers ask us, you know, when is the best time to schedule my migration? And people's initial thought is to schedule it after hours, and because that's generally when it's the slowest for their customers. But I would definitely advise against doing that. I would say pick a time during business hours when you have all hands on deck in case something goes wrong and you need someone to kind of, you know, jump in and comment on something, or, you know, something actually does go wrong and you need to, you know, revert something, then it's best to have everyone in their normal business hours. But definitely pick the slowest day of the week and the slowest, you know, time of the day that allows you to complete the migration, you know, by the end of the day. But definitely do it during business hours if possible. I actually wanted to talk about establishing the case continuity, number 6 here. That one is interesting because how generally Desk and other support systems like Service Cloud, they all use some sort of method to track cases and the email replies that go into those cases. So when you send an email out to a customer, it's usually associated to a case. And when a reply comes back, it doesn't really know what case to associate that email to unless there's a way to identify what case it came from. So usually what Desk does and what Service Cloud does is we hide a little text identifier into the body of your replies, and then when the customer quotes that reply, your case knows where to go based on that text identifier. The problem is that Desk and Service Cloud have different little, you know, thread IDs is what they're called. So when you migrate the cases over, the replies that are coming from your customers won't have the new thread IDs for those new Service Cloud cases. So what you want to do is reach out on as many of your active cases as possible to get that new text identifier into the customer's reply to your existing cases. And it doesn't have to be, you know, very obvious that that's what you're doing, but when you reach out, you want to just, you know, follow up on active cases. Maybe you actually have something to say. Maybe you just want to say, hey, I'm checking on this case. But you want to reach out and just reestablish that case continuity so you don't have to do a lot of merging. All right, and another big piece of the planning here is duplicate management. It's often kind of an overlooked piece of the data migration, but the duplicate management is actually very important because it's bound to happen during a data migration. Generally, there will be duplicates created between two systems if you're merging data sets. It's just kind of a nature of how data migrations are. So it's important to have a data migration duplicate management plan. And so here's some general tips here. So before the migration happens, you'll want to clean up the data as much as possible. Now in Desk, it's a little bit difficult to work with your existing customers in bulk, but you'll want to kind of clean those up as much as possible and make sure that the information is accurate. You also want to determine unique IDs. So for Desk migrations, that will be the Desk, you know, case or customer or company ID. And then you also want to disable your duplicate validation rules in Salesforce. Depending on which migration tool you use, But you'll want to check on those and make sure that, if you do have those duplication rules enabled, then how is that going to affect your data migration? And can you afford to turn them off during the data migration? So during the migration, determine what constitutes a duplicate. What is your unique IDs? What will you match your, for example, if you have a customer email in Desk, is that, same customer email in Service Cloud? Is that a match, if you have existing data? You also want to define a process to merge the duplicates. That's, you want your agents to be trained on that process and to practice it in advance so that when they're in a live situation. So an ongoing duplicate management is to build a duplicate management plan. It's kind of a combination of the previous things, but how are you going to keep your data clean going forward? What are you going to use to determine duplicates? There are a host of great tools out there, either built in Salesforce or on the App Exchange that you can take advantage of that will help you manage your duplicates. So definitely recommend doing some research and checking those out. And so there are some other migration considerations you might want to think about when you're planning. What are your Salesforce plan restrictions? What sort of products do you have? What sort of limitations do you have on your data storage, on your file storage? Do you have a certain number of records that you have in Desk, and will those all fit in Salesforce? So it's important to think about that sort of stuff in advance, just so you're not surprised on migration day. Do I have the team and resources needed to perform a successful migration? Maybe you need to reach out to a partner if you don't have those resources, but just thinking about your team and who's going to perform each task is also part of the planning. Have I planned and communicated my cutover strategy? I talked about that before, but just making sure that everyone's on board with what's going to happen on migration day. And then, do I need all the data right away? Some things, often customers say that they don't need, all of their attachments from, 2 years ago, on the migration day. Maybe you just, need to focus on those cases that were created in the last couple of months or are active. So it's not always important to, bring old historical cases over right away. Maybe you just need what you're actively working on. So that brings us to defining your data. This is kind of the second section here. It's still part of planning, but defining what data you want to actually bring over. So there are a few decision factors that kind of all factor into this decision. And the first one is existing data. Do you have existing data that's being synced between the two systems? Do you have an existing Salesforce org that you're merging your Desk data into? So those kind of make things complicated. But if you have Desk Connect on, which is our syncing product, you may not even need to migrate your data. So definitely take a look at your Desk Connect settings, and if you have that on, and see, what exactly you're syncing over, if anything. And if you're already syncing your cases, you may not need to do much as far as the data migration. And then if you have an existing Salesforce org, maybe a different team at your company uses, Sales Cloud or something like that, then you may be merging into an existing data set. And if you're not syncing, maybe you need to think a little bit more about how the existing data is going to be affected. Maybe there are specific requirements on those existing, accounts and contacts that you'll need to be aware of. Maybe often accounts are kind of sacred in Salesforce, and doing a migration, you need to be aware that you might be updating those existing records. So if you have an existing org, definitely sync with all of your internal stakeholders and admins about what exactly is going to be happening during the migration and what needs to be avoided. And then the second factor is the date range. I kind of talked about that, but do you need the data from all time? Do you need the last, maybe 6 to 12 months? Maybe you just need a month, depending on how your customer support team functions. But often in desk, customers actually have a lot of junk, and that's because of some of the rules we have for auto creating customers and companies. Basically, out of the box, desk will just create customers out of anyone who emails you. And often in Salesforce, contacts are a little bit more specific and thought out than that. So, do you need all those old customers? Do you need all your old accounts and companies? So that's something to think about. And then the third decision factor is the support processes. What data does your team need to run? And this is kind of more thinking about the metadata, the custom fields, what rules and external systems are you using to run your support team on a day-to-day basis. And so when you do run your migration, what fields will you need to make those processes run? And finally, I wanted to talk about some migration alternatives. There's a short list here, but some customers just decide to start fresh. And I think it's actually kind of liberating to, it's like in desk, you've been kind of hoarding all of your, customers. And it's kind of like just moving houses and not bringing anything and just buying all new furniture. So I think that there's some power in that, and it should be given some thought. But if you're not quite comfortable with doing that, then maybe you just want your data exported. Desk can provide you with, a full export of all of your desk data in CSV format, and we'll be happy to provide that for you. It may actually be necessary for your data migration, but if you want to just store it somewhere safe, then you can just get a full copy of Desk. So moving on to the migration tool. This is, I'd say, the biggest single decision of your migration strategy, but it definitely takes a lot of effort to test and to select a tool. But I wanted to cover all those other planning things first, but let's talk about the migration tool now. So to talk about the migration tools, we need to talk about the data models, because it affects how the tools function. So on the left side here, we have a list of objects from the desk uses, and on the right, we have Service Cloud. So you can see the users, they have the same name. Groups are called queues, custom fields, companies are called accounts, customers are called contacts, cases, and so on. And articles are called knowledge articles. So you can see that things line up pretty well. They have the same overall hierarchy of, companies and accounts at the top, kind of represent an organization with, customers and contacts representing those people. And then cases are specific instances of support, and interactions or individual messages and notes and so on. So they have very similar data models, but there's some key differences that I wanted to talk about that kind of make things a little bit challenging and determine maybe will determine your choice on migration tool. So to further kind of define these, we have kind of two paths here. We have case data and we have article data. So on the left is the case data section. It covers all those things I just talked about: companies, customers, and cases. So sometimes I'll say case data, and it doesn't mean just the actual cases. It means everything that goes along with that, including accounts and contacts and all the attachments and interactions and everything. And then on the right is the article data, sometimes called knowledge base or KB data, but that kind of encompasses everything in your content management. So that would be brands, if you have those in Desk, topics, and articles, and then within those articles are images, custom or fields. We don't have custom fields, but attachments and links and so on. So when I talk about case or article data, I don't necessarily mean just cases and articles, but kind of everything that goes along with it. So back to those important data model differences. In Salesforce, I think the big one that shocks most customers is labels. So Salesforce doesn't have labels. So there's multiple ways to deal with it, but I think the general consensus is that you just replace them with custom fields. There aren't quite the limitations on custom fields that you have in Desk as compared to Salesforce. So, and that really works well with reporting. So before you do your migration, this is kind of getting into the configuration side of things, but you want to look at your labels and see how they're functioning and what can be replaced with custom fields. But the reason why I mention it is that if you're going to migrate your data, you're going to have to decide what to do with your labels. So what we'd recommend is if you want to bring your labels over, you just put those into a comma separated list into like a text area field and store them that way. Because there isn't really a good formatted field option to put those labels into. Contact emails. So Desk customers have up to 10 emails. Contacts in Salesforce have a single email. Now you can add more custom fields that hold emails in Salesforce, but it doesn't really work with the built-in kind of automation processes that the standard single email field does. So there's a big difference there. You'll have to kind of figure out what to do with additional emails. Our recommendation right now is to just bring along one, the primary email, and the rest you might store in like a comma separated format on a separate field, but that's just a limitation that we'll have to deal with. Case assignments. Cases in Salesforce must have an owner. In Desk, you can have a fully unassigned case and where it's neither assigned to a group or to a user, but in Salesforce, cases must be assigned to someone, either to a queue or a user, but you can't have both. So in Salesforce, there's only one owner and you have to have one, but it could be either a queue or a user. So it's a little bit different. In Desk, you would just have either, you can have both a user and a group assigned. So generally what we do is if the case in Desk is unassigned, is not assigned to an agent, but is assigned to a group, then we would assign that to the queue in Salesforce. And if it is assigned to a user in Desk, then we'll just assign it to that user. Social profiles. So in Desk, all the social stuff is pretty well integrated, and all the Twitter handles, Facebook names are actually on the customer directly. But in Service Cloud, there's a separate kind of product called Social Studio, and there's separate related objects for the social profiles and social posts. So a little bit different thinking there. And then finally, articles. There's some restrictions on what you can actually store in the body of an article. You're not able to add in certain inlined iframes or embed certain videos from certain providers. So that's kind of a big one. Some things will just break if you migrate it straight over. And some of the inline styles that you could put into Desk articles will not work in the Knowledge product. All right, so let's talk about the article migration tool. Now, this is a tool that was built by our team and came out a couple months ago. But basically what it does is it migrates your desk topics and articles into knowledge articles and data categories in Salesforce. And so why? So knowledge is the default content management product in Salesforce. And so it's obvious to migrate the articles into those, but topics are going into data categories. And the reason why we did that is that data categories are actually used by the communities product, which is the equivalent of the support center, and kind of provide a link to that community's setup. So if you migrate the articles with the tool, definitely recommend migrating your topics into your data categories so that you have that set up and ready to go. Inline images, it automatically grabs and rehosts your desk images in Salesforce. It has replaces internal article links. So that was kind of a big problem, is that in articles and desk would link between each other, but it relied on the ID and URL of the desk articles. So when you migrate them, it would break the link. So we replaced those for you, and then we grab and rehost the attachments if you have those on your articles. So some current limitations. Translations are not available yet. We're just migrating the default language only. But that's something we're working on. Hopefully have something for you guys in the next couple months. But it's something that we are currently developing. And then the private portal images, you must disable your private portal for us to grab those images from your articles. We're also working on that. So if you have those limitations and have time, maybe you want to hold off on running that migration. But for now, these features aren't available. All right, and so the other side of things, the case migration, we have what we call the SCMT, or the Service Cloud Migration Tool. And some of you might be familiar with this tool, but I'm going to kind of gloss over it. But it's basically a free app on the App Exchange. It runs in Lightning, so that's no code is required, and it's actually open source. And we actually recommend it for customers that don't have an existing Salesforce org. And so here's kind of our decision guide for the SCMT, and I'm actually kind of want to highlight it, these things, because I'm going to talk about a new tool we're developing to replace this tool. But quickly, basically, the SCMT is more for people who are migrating to Desk to Service Cloud and have kind of minimal customization requirements. The tool doesn't allow you to map users and queues and custom fields, which kind of limits you to migrating into an existing Salesforce org, because it would duplicate all of those setup things. But if you just want to copy your data straight over, works really well. And it does do pretty well at scale. So if you have millions of records, which most of our customers don't, but it's still possible. But if you have millions of records, it's probably something you should consider. But if you have an existing Salesforce implementation, it's kind of tricky to work with, and we'd recommend using the data loader or a different or another tool. But I wanted to move on and just kind of show you guys the latest thing we're working on. We're calling this the Desk Migration Tool, and this is still in development. We're hoping to kind of pilot this in the next few weeks, but I wanted to show it to you guys. Basically, it's just a single flexible migration tool that combines the article migration side of things and the case migration. And we're looking to pilot this later in the month and have a kind of an open beta in June, if everything goes well. But basically, it just kind of addresses those limitations from the old tool, the SCMT tool, And it kind of builds on things that we started with the article migration tool. So I'm gonna, I guess I can demo in a second, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about what it does. It combines the case and article migrations into a single tool. It allows you to map users, groups, and custom fields and standard fields, which really allows you to match with your configuration and setup that you had done previously, or if you have an existing org. And manage and retry failed records. The SCMT tool would have to run the whole thing again if one record failed. Duplicate prevention, it matches on existing records, which is a nice plus. And then the current limitations are it's a little bit slower. It's designed for smaller customers, but we hope that to expand that and kind of make it more available for larger customers. But it's really designed on to work with our smaller customers. And then right now it's pre-selecting what we're matching on existing records on. And so for contact, it's the email, and for account, it's the name. But you're actually not able to change that right at this moment. But I wanted to demo it for you guys to give you a sneak preview of what it will look like. So let's do that now. So let's hop over into Salesforce here. And I've set up a little demo org. And this is a managed package that you can install. And we'll probably pre-install it in our desk child org, if you guys are familiar with that. But here, you're just able to select a different migration type. So we either have articles or case migrations. And each one has like a different set of permissions that you need. Like this one, you need to have the manage articles permission. But for the case side of things, you don't need that. So make sure you have the right permissions. And if you use the article tool, you're probably pretty familiar with what this is. So you hit continue, and then you enter your desk URL. And I have my test site here. And with the old SCMT tool, you had to enter in you had to go into desk and create an API application and copy the tokens over. But with this, we have the new OAuth flow. Yeah, but here's the article migration configuration. Basically, you can decide if you want topics, and then if you want to create some fields, and then we'll add these to the layout automatically for you. A little bit of background on that. So in Salesforce, every object has what's called a layout that determines what fields are shown to the user. And so often, at the beginning when we were doing this, we were creating new fields. Like, for example, I can create a new custom field for keywords here. And before, we weren't adding them to the layout. So you would just start the migration, it would create the custom field, but you wouldn't see it on the actual records at the end. So now we're doing that. So if you select the layout, we'll add it to the layout for you. And so then you can go through and map the standard fields here for the article migration. Let's add a couple here. And then when you're ready, you can click start. This is just saying, hey, we're going to match some existing records. But if you don't have any desk articles before in here, then it's not going to do that. So it won't duplicate any articles. You can run it as many times as you want, and it will update things depending on which fields you select. So if you want to run it once and then you make some updates in desk, then you can run it again later, and it will bring those updates over. So here is just showing you the migrated 5 topics, 13 articles, and it's fetching some attachments. And now those attachments are migrated, and then it's going to finish in a second. And so now it's done, and it's going to tell us what the next steps are here, and we can just click on this link to go and check out our new published articles. And we can see here, like, we just click on one of these, we can see that the body and the keywords and everything has been brought over. Additionally, we have our topic here and data categories, which is really useful for communities and just maintaining your structure of the data. All right, so when you're done, we click complete. And now I wanted to show you the case migration side of things. Similar setup flow. You just enter your desk URL. If you've already authorized, it doesn't have to do anything. But basically what you see here on the third step is a list of objects here on the left. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that you have all the required data before we start. So here there's a little checkbox. When we click on this, this checkbox will get filled out once we have all the required information. So here we're missing the profile. So we're able to select a profile when we're creating new users. So once I've selected that and I've mapped all the users, which are actually pre-mapped by email, see they're matched up by the email address here. Once these are all filled out, you can see if they're not all filled out, then this isn't checked. But yeah, so map all the users. This is great. It just pulls all your existing users and you can map them up and then move on to groups. And we have to map all the groups. So just make sure all those are mapped. And it'll actually pre-map these based on the name. And then moving on to accounts, you can select the layout and map our domains and just so on. And to cases where we can select we could select a created date or a modified date, or we could select just all the data. And so once you've kind of filled all this out, you can click Start Migration, and it'll go off and kick off that migration and migrate your data. So hopefully we'll be able to get this out to you guys in the next couple of weeks for some customers who will be in the pilot. And then after that, in June, we're going to have a beta for testing this out. And we really think that this will improve the overall migration process and give that flexibility that the old SCMT tool didn't have. So if you're able to hold off and kind of wait to test this out, we'd love to have you try it out. And if you're interested in being in the pilot, then just comment in the GoToMeeting chat and we'll reach out to you about that. All right, let's hop back to our presentation here. Yep, so once again, if you're interested in piloting out the new tool, just let us know. So in the last few minutes, I wanted to talk about just picking a migration tool. Used to be that having an existing org used to mean that, having an existing org used to mean that you would have to go to the data loader, but hopefully with the new tool, that means that will allow us to migrate into existing orgs. But the data loader is always a good backup option if one of the tools doesn't work for you. There's also working with partners if you don't want to implement yourself. Generally, if you are a larger customer with millions of records that you need to bring over, definitely recommend talking to a partner at least, and because things get tricky the more records you have. There's a couple other options, Jitterbit or ETL tools, extract, transform, and load. Those are always an option. I worked with a couple of those. I've tried Jitterbit. I wouldn't say that I'm impressed with them, but if you have a Jitterbit license already, then it may be something you look into. Also, just a reminder that Desk can give you full site exports, so maybe you just want to back up your data. You can do that with full exports. And so to kind of sum all this up, I kind of listed out 3 of the features: cost, ease of use, and customizations. And so most of the tools are free, except for Jitterbit and other paid tools. Partners, obviously not free, but that we have a bunch of free tools from the App Exchange that you can use, and the data loader. As far as ease of use, the data loader is a little bit more difficult to use and can be a little tricky if you haven't worked with it before. I find Jitterbit and other tools to be difficult to use, but the free tools that we have on the App Exchange are pretty easy to use. And then the level of customizations, SCMT has very low customizations, just basically click a button to start. The desk migration tool is the new tool I just demoed, and it has, I would say, a medium to high level of customizations, just because you're able to map users and queues. The data loader basically gives you full control over the data, and because you have it in that CSV format. And then Jitterbit and others, high level of customization. So you can use this to kind of make a decision. I would definitely recommend at least trying out a couple of these and see what works best for you. And I wanted to talk a little bit about partners. We have some suggested partners, and we'll send this deck out to you guys if you want to reach out to one of these people if you're interested in that. All right, so kind of wrapping up here, I wanted to leave a little bit of time for Q&A, but we have some additional resources. We have our own trail mix and our own trail in Trailhead, and there's a data migration one in there. It's a little bit out of date at this point, but hopefully we'll be updating that. We also have a data migration accelerator. If you have Premier support, that's an option for you. And then these webinars are also a great source of information, and our support team is always here to help you guys.